$50 million. That's what the men in the tailored suits slammed on Arthur's kitchen table. His neighbors had already taken the cash, packing up generations of history. Arthur looked at the check, looked at the bulldozers idling outside, and struck a match. "Get off my land," he whispered. Grayson Valley used to smell like bruised peaches and damp soil. For over a century, it was a quiet, sprawling basin in the Pacific Northwest, home to families who measured their wealth not in bank accounts, but in crop yields and rain gauges. Arthur Pendleton was one of them. At 62, Arthur was a man carved from the very earth. He worked calloused hands, sun-leathery skin, and a stubborn streak that was legendary in the local diner. His family had owned Pendleton orchards since 1912, surviving the Great Depression, devastating droughts, and the slow, suffocating squeeze of modern corporate agriculture. But nothing could have prepared Arthur or Grayson Valley for the arrival of Preston Harrington. It started on a humid Tuesday in late April. A fleet of glossy black SUVs rolled down County Road 9, kicking up dust that settled over the blooming peach trees. Preston Harrington stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was a senior acquisition director for a megalithic development firm called Apex Horizon Group. Harrington didn't wear a tie. He wore a pristine, casually unbuttoned linen shirt that somehow looked more intimidating than a three-piece suit. He exuded the quiet, terrifying confidence of a man who possessed unlimited capital and zero patience. Apex Horizon Group wasn't there to negotiate. They were there to conquer. Their pitch to the town was a master-planned, hyper-luxury eco-community called the Verde Estates. It promised to bring thousands of jobs, a high-end commercial district, and property tax revenues that made Mayor Mitchell Hayes practically salivate. But to build it, Apex needed the valley floor. All of it. The buyouts began within 48 hours. Agricultural land in Grayson Valley was historically valued at roughly $9,000 an acre. Harrington's opening offer to the local farmers was $35,000 an acre. It was a tsunami of cash that immediately shattered the community's loyalty to the land. Arthur's closest neighbor, Henry Gable, was the first to fold. Henry and Arthur had grown up together. Henry had been the best man at Arthur's wedding. They had pulled each other's tractors out of the mud more times than either could count. But Henry was pushing 70, his knees were shot, and his kids had moved to Seattle years ago, with zero interest in farming. When Harrington offered Henry $8 million for his 220 acres, the old man broke down and signed the paperwork the very same afternoon. Arthur stood by his barbed wire fence a week later, watching Henry load up his Ford pickup. Henry couldn't even look Arthur in the eye. He just raised a hand, got in his truck, and drove away. By the end of the month, the massive yellow excavators had torn down Henry's farmhouse, ripping up the century-old oak tree in the front yard like it was a weed. The dominoes fell fast. Sarah Jenkins, the widow who ran the dairy farm to the south, sold for $12 million. The Henderson brothers to the east took $15 million. Within 6 months, Arthur Pendleton's 600-acre orchard was the only patch of green left in a 5-mile radius. He was completely surrounded by a sea of scraped brown dirt chain-link construction fences and roaring diesel machinery. Then Harrington came for Arthur. Harrington sat at Arthur's battered kitchen table, sipping a glass of iced tea Arthur hadn't offered him. "Arthur," Harrington said smoothly, his voice practically dripping with artificial empathy. "You're an island. The valley as you knew it is gone. Mayor Hayes has already approved the rezoning. Your property is the geographic center of our Phase 2 commercial district. I respect your heritage, I really do. But you're fighting the ocean." Harrington slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract. The number on the bottom line was staggering $24 million. $40,000 an acre. Arthur didn't even open the folder. He looked out his window at the sprawling rows of peach trees his grandfather had planted the soil his father had bled for, and the front porch where his late wife, Martha, had taken her last breath. "Mr. Harrington," Arthur said, his voice low and gravelly, "I don't care if you pave the rest of this county in gold. My wife is buried in the family plot on the ridge. My name is on the deed, and this land is not for sale." Harrington's smile vanished. The mask of the polite corporate savior slipped, revealing the ruthless shark underneath. He tapped his finger on the table. "Every man has a price, Arthur, and every man has a breaking point. I suggest you figure out which one you want to reach first." Harrington walked out. The next morning, the real war began. When billions of dollars are on the line, corporations don't just walk away. They suffocate you. Apex Horizon Group quickly realized that Arthur Pendleton was going to be a problem, so they decided to make his life a waking nightmare. It started with the dust. The developers ordered their excavation crews to work double shifts on the perimeters directly bordering Arthur's farm. Massive earth movers churned up the dry topsoil, and massive industrial fans, supposedly used for ventilation, happened to be angled directly toward Arthur's orchards. A thick, choking layer of brown dust coated Arthur's peach trees right as they were budding. It blocked the sunlight, disrupted the pollinators, and threatened to ruin his entire harvest. When Arthur complained to the County Environmental Board, he found the doors firmly shut. Mayor Mitchell Hayes had stacked the board with pro-development cronies. Arthur was told that Apex was operating within acceptable municipal parameters. Then came the road closures. Grayson Valley had a network of old county highways that farmers use to transport their produce. Suddenly, Mayor Hayes signed an emergency infrastructure ordinance. The main access road leading to Arthur's farm was torn up for essential sewer upgrades, leaving Arthur with a treacherous, unpaved back route that added 2 hours to any delivery. When harvest time came, the bumpy, pothole-riddled detour bruised nearly 30% of Arthur's delicate peach crop in the back of his transport trucks. Buyers rejected the shipments. For the first time in 40 years, Pendleton orchards operated at a massive loss. Arthur was bleeding cash, and the local bank, heavily influenced by the sudden influx of Apex money in the town, refused to extend his line of credit. The psychological warfare escalated. Powerful stadium-style floodlights were erected on the construction sites, pointed aggressively toward Arthur's farmhouse, turning his nights into perpetual blinding daylight. Strange things started happening on the property. A section of his irrigation pipeline was mysteriously smashed. A small fire broke out in his equipment barn, destroying a $150,000 tractor. When Arthur called the authorities, Sheriff Brody, a man who had just received a hefty campaign donation from a patsy linked to Apex, shrugged it off as a probable electrical fault and refused to investigate further. Arthur was 72 hours away from bankruptcy. He sat on his porch at 2 a.m. a shotgun, resting across his knees, the blinding glare of the developer's floodlights washing over his exhausted face. He looked at the paperwork Harrington had mailed him that morning. The offer had been bumped to $50 million. A final courtesy, the letter said. Arthur picked up a pen. He was broken. He was tired. He was ready to sign. But as he stared at the blinding lights illuminating the construction site a mile away, something caught his eye. Arthur had been working this land his entire life. He knew the soil, the bedrock, and the mechanics of farming better than anyone. He watched a convoy of massive flatbed trucks roll into the Apex site under the cover of darkness. They weren't carrying lumber. They weren't carrying drywall or standard residential plumbing. They were carrying massive 50-inch industrial steel pipes and heavy-duty subterranean cooling turbines. Arthur lowered his pen. You don't need 50-inch industrial cooling pipes to build luxury eco-homes, he thought. The next morning, instead of calling Harrington to surrender, Arthur drove 4 hours into Portland. He tracked down Dr. Leonard Finch, a brilliant but eccentric former state hydrologist who had been forced into early retirement after blowing the whistle on a corrupt logging conglomerate. Leonard was living in a cramped apartment, overflowing with geological survey maps. Arthur slapped a series of nighttime photographs he had taken of the Apex construction materials onto Leonard's desk. "I need to know what they are actually building in my valley," Arthur demanded. Leonard adjusted his thick glasses, squinting at the photos. For 3 days, Leonard dug through encrypted municipal permits, shell company registries, and satellite topography of Grayson Valley. When Leonard finally drove his beat-up Subaru down to Arthur's farm, he looked like he had seen a ghost. Leonard spread a massive color-coded geological map across Arthur's kitchen table. "Arthur," Leonard said, his voice trembling slightly. "Apex Horizon Group isn't building a master-planned eco-community. That's a front. The residential zoning was just a smokescreen to acquire the land cheaply and quietly." Arthur frowned. "Then what are they building? A hyperscale artificial intelligence data center," Leonard revealed. "One of the largest in the world. They are laying the groundwork for a massive subterranean server farm." "Why here?" Arthur asked. "We're in the middle of nowhere." Leonard tapped a massive blue shape on the map that sat directly beneath Grayson Valley. "Because of this. The Grayson Aquifer. AI data centers of this magnitude run incredibly hot. They require millions of gallons of fresh water every single day just to cool the servers. They chose this valley because of the aquifer." Arthur looked at the map, and then a slow, dangerous realization dawned on him. He traced his calloused finger to the center of the blue shape on the map. "Wait," Arthur murmured. "Look at the topography." Leonard nodded, a wild grin spreading across his face. "Exactly. The aquifer isn't an open lake. It's a pressurized underground system, and due to the bedrock formations, the apex of that pressure, the only place where you can legally and physically drill the industrial-scale wells required to pull that volume of water, is right here." Leonard tapped his finger directly on the outline of Pendleton Orchards. "By Oregon state law, agricultural water rights are tied to the surface property, and grandfathered in," Leonard explained. "If they don't own your 600 acres, they don't own the water rights. And if they don't have the water rights, they can't cool their servers. If they can't cool their servers, their multi-billion-dollar data center is a useless concrete tomb." Arthur leaned back in his chair. The crushing weight of the past 6 months suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharpened steel in his chest. Harrington hadn't been offering $50 million because he wanted to build a shopping mall over Arthur's peach trees. He was offering $50 million because Arthur unwittingly held the keys to a $50 billion tech empire. Arthur Pendleton didn't just have a farm anymore. He had a fortress. He had the developer by the throat, and he was about to declare war. The revelation in Arthur's kitchen didn't just change the game. It flipped the entire board. For 6 months, Arthur had been playing defense, trying to protect his grandfather's peach trees from a corporation he thought simply wanted to build swimming pools and golf courses. Now he knew he was the single bottleneck in a $50 billion tech infrastructure project. But Arthur wasn't foolish enough to confront Preston Harrington immediately. If Apex Horizon Group knew that Arthur had discovered their true intentions, they would stop trying to buy him out and start trying to destroy him through legal loopholes. Mayor Mitchell Hayes was firmly in their pocket, and the town council was blinded by the promise of property taxes. Arthur needed a weapon sharper than a shotgun. He needed an apex predator of his own. Dr. Leonard Finch made a few calls to his old contacts in the state capital, and 3 days later, a sleek silver sedan pulled up the dusty, rutted driveway of Pendleton Orchards. Out stepped Rebecca Langdon. Rebecca was a legendary environmental litigator based in Portland, infamous for bankrupting a chemical conglomerate in the 1990s. She walked in high heels through the dirt without looking down, once carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than she was. Arthur poured her a cup of black coffee. Rebecca didn't touch it. She spent 4 hours poring over Leonard's geological maps, the intercepted freight manifests, and the low-ball contracts Apex had used to swindle Henry Gable and the other farmers. When she finally looked up, her eyes were gleaming with a terrifying intensity. They committed fraud. Rebecca stated, her voice like cracking ice. Apex purchased the surrounding 3,000 acres under the guise of residential zoning. They paid your neighbors $35,000 an acre. But industrial tech zoning with water access is valued at roughly $400,000 an acre. They didn't just lowball your friends, Arthur. They defrauded them out of hundreds of millions of dollars by lying about the land's intended municipal use. Can we prove it? Arthur asked, leaning forward. With these freight manifests for the industrial cooling turbines? Yes, Rebecca said, snapping her briefcase shut. But we have a bigger problem. Once Mayor Hayes realizes you aren't going to sell, he's going to use eminent domain. He will claim the town needs your land for an emergency municipal water facility, which he will then privately lease to Apex. We need to cut the legs out from under the mayor before Harrington can pull that trigger. The counter-offensive began on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week before the next scheduled town hall meeting. Arthur didn't go to the press. He went to the diner. He walked into the Grayson Valley Diner at 6 a.m., holding a stack of manila envelopes. He handed the first one to Henry Gable, who was sitting in the corner, staring miserably into his oatmeal. Henry had bought a flashy new condo in Seattle with his buyout money, but he hated the city and drove back down to Grayson every week just to feel the familiar air. "What's this, Arthur?" Henry mumbled, too ashamed to meet his old friend's eyes. "It's proof that you sold your birthright for pennies on the dollar." "Henry," Arthur said loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Harrington didn't buy your land for houses. He bought it for a server farm. He stole your legacy, and he did it at a 90% discount." Within 24 hours, the valley erupted. The farmers who had sold their land, realizing they had been utterly played, were furious. The same people who had pressured Arthur to give up were suddenly rallying behind him. But Preston Harrington was not a man who surrendered easily. When he caught wind of Arthur's whispering campaign, he panicked. He bypassed negotiations entirely and went straight for the nuclear option. 2 days before the town hall meeting, Sheriff Brody drove up to Arthur's porch. He looked deeply uncomfortable, sweating through his uniform collar. He handed Arthur a thick legal document, stamped with the seal of Grayson County. "I'm sorry, Arthur," Brody muttered, refusing to make eye contact. "Mayor's orders. It's an imminent seizure notice. The county is claiming eminent domain over the Grayson Aquifer access point, under your property for public utility expansion. You have 14 days to vacate the premises. The county will compensate you at fair market agricultural value. $9,000 an acre. They weren't offering $50 million anymore. They were stealing it for $5. Arthur looked at the notice, folded it carefully, and put it in his shirt pocket. "Tell the mayor I'll see him at the town hall, Brody." Thursday night arrived with a storm brewing over the valley. The Grayson County High School gymnasium was packed to the rafters. Every bought-out farmer, every local business owner, and a dozen regional reporters Rebecca Langdon had quietly tipped off were sitting in the bleachers. Mayor Mitchell Hayes sat at the center of the folding tables, sweating profusely, flanked by Preston Harrington and Apex's corporate attorneys. Mayor Hayes banged his gavel. "Order. We are here to discuss the eminent domain seizure of the Pendleton parcel, for the Apex Horizon Group Artificial Intelligence Data Center, a voice boomed from the back. Arthur walked down the center aisle, accompanied by Rebecca Langdon and Dr. Leonard Finch. Arthur wasn't wearing his overalls. He was wearing the dark wool suit he had married his wife in, and the one he intended to be buried in. He carried a massive projector under his arm. Before the mayor could stop him, Leonard plugged the projector into the wall and beamed the geological maps and the intercepted freight manifests onto the gymnasium wall for the entire town to see. The crowd gasped. Rebecca Langdon stepped up to the microphone. "Mayor Hayes," she said, her voice echoing off the hardwood floor, "we have filed a class-action fraud lawsuit against Apex Horizon Group on behalf of 22 local landowners. Furthermore, we have submitted these documents to the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. Your eminent domain claim is illegal as it serves a private, corporate interest, masquerading as a public utility." Harrington stood up, his face purple with rage. "This is slander. We have all the necessary permits, or you have residential permits," Rebecca fired back. "If you try to sink a 50-inch industrial cooling pipe into the Grayson Aquifer without a federal impact study, the EPA will freeze this entire valley in litigation for the next 2 decades. Your multi-billion-dollar project is officially dead in the water." The gymnasium erupted into chaos. Henry Gable threw a chair. The reporters' cameras flashed wildly. Mayor Hayes looked like he was about to faint. Arthur walked right up to the folding table, staring directly into Preston Harrington's panicked eyes. "I told you, Mr. Harrington," Arthur whispered, his voice cutting through the noise. "This land is not for sale." The fallout was catastrophic for Apex Horizon Group. The local news ran the story the next morning, and by noon it had been picked up by national financial networks. Wall Street does not like uncertainty, and the revelation that Apex's flagship $50 billion AI infrastructure project was stalled by a single, stubborn peach farmer sent their stock plummeting. 3 days after the town hall disaster, a sleek corporate helicopter landed in the scraped dirt lot where Henry Gable's farmhouse used to stand. Preston Harrington didn't step out. Harrington had been fired unceremoniously the night before his career left in ruins. Instead, Richard Montgomery, the CEO and founder of Apex Horizon Group, stepped out of the chopper. Montgomery was not a shark in a linen shirt. He was an engineer who had built his empire from scratch. He understood leverage, and he knew when he had been outplayed. Montgomery walked the 2 miles down the dirt road to Pendleton Orchards alone. He found Arthur in the back grove, quietly pruning a damaged peach tree. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and incoming rain. "Mr. Pendleton," Montgomery said quietly, keeping a respectful distance. Arthur didn't turn around. "You're trespassing, son." "My name is Richard Montgomery. I run Apex, and I am here to apologize." Montgomery took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. Harrington was a fool. He treated this like a hostile corporate takeover. He didn't understand the land, and he didn't understand you. "But I am sitting on $2 billion worth of subterranean fiber optics and concrete, and my board of directors is ready to have my head. I need your water, Arthur. I am asking you man to man, what is it going to take?" Arthur finally turned around. He wiped his pruning shears on his jeans and looked at the billionaire. "I already told your boy," Arthur said firmly. "I am not selling my land. I am not leaving my home, and I am not letting you destroy the water table for the rest of this state. We have advanced closed-loop cooling technology," Montgomery countered, desperation leaking into his voice. "We can cycle the water treated and return it to the aquifer with zero environmental degradation. We can do this cleanly, but we need the physical access point. We need the rights." Arthur walked over to his battered pickup truck and pulled out a leather binder prepared by Rebecca Langdon. He handed it to Montgomery. "I'm not selling you the land," Arthur repeated. but I will lease you the subterranean water rights, under my terms." Montgomery opened the binder. As he read the demands, his eyes widened in absolute shock. Arthur's terms were unprecedented in the history of American real estate. Arthur would retain full undivided ownership of the 600-acre surface farm. Apex would be granted an underground easement to drill their cooling pipes. But the price was staggering. First, a $150 million upfront signing bonus. Second, a 4% perpetual royalty on the gross revenue generated by the data center's server leases. Third, and this was the term that made Montgomery swallow hard, Apex was required to establish a $50 million agricultural trust fund to restore the damaged topsoil on the neighboring properties they had bulldozed, essentially forcing the tech giant to pay for the revival of Grayson Valley's farming community. Arthur Montgomery breathed, staring at the contract. "The royalties alone, you'll be making tens of millions of dollars a year. You'll be one of the richest men in the Pacific Northwest." "I don't care about the money," Arthur said, looking out over the blooming canopy of his orchards. "I care about the trees. I care that Henry Gable gets to come back here and start a cooperative greenhouse on the land you tore up. I care that my wife's grave doesn't overlook a parking lot. You want to build your computers underground? Fine. But the surface belongs to us." Montgomery looked at the stubborn old farmer, then at the massive expanse of the valley. He had no choice. The alternative was walking away from a $50 billion investment. Montgomery pulled a gold fountain pen from his pocket. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He signed the paperwork against the rusted hood of Arthur's pickup truck. "You're a terrifying negotiator, Mr. Pendleton." Montgomery said, handing the binder back. "I'm not a negotiator," Arthur replied, picking up his shears. "I'm a farmer. I know how to separate the wheat from the chaff." Within 6 months, the roaring bulldozers changed their tune. The massive data center was built entirely underground, invisible to the naked eye. The closed-loop water system functioned flawlessly, cooling the servers and returning clean water back to the earth. With the $50 million agricultural trust, Henry Gable and several other farmers returned. They couldn't buy their original acres back. Apex still owned the surface rights around Arthur, but Arthur leased them portions of his newly expanded state-of-the-art agricultural cooperative, fully funded by his tech royalties. Arthur Pendleton became a legend. He was the man who went to war with a corporate leviathan and forced them to bend the knee. He didn't just save his farm. He inadvertently negotiated the most lucrative agricultural real estate deal of the 21st century. And every morning, long after his bank account had swelled past $200 million, Arthur woke up at 5 a.m. He put on his faded overalls, drank a cup of black coffee, and walked out into the cool morning air. He tended to his peach trees, the roots, digging deep into the soil, entirely undisturbed by the billions of bytes of data flashing silently in the dark earth beneath his boots. He had held his ground, and the earth had rewarded him. If you loved this incredible true story of how one stubborn farmer took down a billion-dollar corporate giant, hit that like button right now. Stories like Arthur's prove that standing your ground can change history. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a brilliant underdog victory, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping real-life tales of revenge, triumph, and high-stakes drama every single week. See you in the next video.